Hit the record. All right. So I want to welcome you all to the advocacy training that MBLS is doing in collaboration with AARP. I'm Amy Hennon. I am the Director of Advocacy and Financial Stabilization at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. I'm going to just hand it over to my colleague, John, who's going to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Kerner with the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. I run the Advanced Planning Project, so I've been doing a lot of community outreach over the last couple of years, and primarily to older adults around the city. So it's great to have the support and continue this conversation about older adult advocacy. And I will throw it over to Inez.
Hi, I'm Inez Robb. I've been involved in community for over 30 years as an advocate, and I do a lot of community. I represent community at a lot of different tables, and I've been involved with community over 30 years after buying a condo and getting involved. So I've got a lot of different experiences with dealing with community and with different agencies. And as I grew older, you know, it's getting more, I've still gotten some wisdom along with that. So hopefully I can share some things, some experiences that I've had through.
Great. And Claudia, will you just introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director at the Community Development Network of Maryland. We're a statewide advocacy organization, and we advocate for more than 180 community development corporations, legal partners, as well as folks doing financial and community based work throughout the state.
Fantastic. All right. So with that, you'll hear from all four of those folks as we move along here. I'm just going to jump right into our PowerPoint. All right. We're going to talk about a couple of different kinds of advocacy today. It is many things, and you're probably already doing it. So we're excited to share with you kind of how we approach advocacy and how we think about advocacy. And then we'll kind of, as we move through each of the pieces, we'll talk about kind of some of the better practices and how to be effective in the work that you do. So we're gonna touch on community-based advocacy. We're gonna touch on regulatory advocacy, some more legislative stuff, which is what people often think of as advocacy, and we're gonna talk a little bit about voting as advocacy. John, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So, and everybody, you know, feel free to jump in if you want to add things. We'll kind of keep it informal, but we want to sort of frame this and then, you know, have this be a conversation as much about strategies for moving forward as it is about, you know, what the lay of the land looks like now. So just to start with community-based advocacy, you know, this is sort of incredible. I think it's endemic to the kind of fabric of Baltimore City neighborhoods where, as Amy said, a lot of folks are already doing this stuff just in the way that they've, you know, had to be self-reliant, be neighborhood reliant, and then also to navigate city systems and state systems as well. So, you know, mostly we're talking about what is the sort of word of mouth network where folks, you know, help each other get access to different types of services, you know, or everything from, you know, talking to 311 to dealing with DPW, SNAP benefits, everything we know about. I think that obviously through COVID, this has taken on a whole other level of organizing, and it was kind of incredible to see what people were doing. Obviously, as things change, we need to, also adjust the systems that we use. During COVID, a lot of things went virtual, and here we are virtual again. It's hard to get people to get on these kind of things. I know there's some breakthroughs with broadband, which has been pretty interesting to watch that happen. People are really listening to some of those issues, and looks like there's some money moving to sort of deal with that. But again, it's really about connecting groups, and we know, obviously the city is a city of neighborhoods. There are so many community associations and neighborhood clubs and block clubs. So a lot of this, I think, and Claudia and I and others on the CDN meetings talk about this all the time. But there's, I think, two big things about this is that it's really also helping groups connect with each other. Like, where are we redoubling our efforts? And I think that the one area where this is so important is, when we talk about capacity funding and support, I think it's a really, really important conversation, because almost all the community associations, if not all of them, are really operating on sweat equity, right? That there's not a lot of capacity support and financial support for them. Sometimes there are program to program, but obviously it's grant cycles. They don't have the capacity, to keep up with the grants and do all that reporting and everything else. So when we try to roll out services, and when the sort of nonprofit landscape is, and all of the organizations are doing what they're doing, we rely incredibly heavily on community-based advocacy and these community associations to do our work. And so I think moving forward, it's incredibly important to continue to talk about what capacity funding looks like. And maybe it's something we can move forward to try to get, some of the bigger funders on calls like these, to really think about that. But basically that's really it. Mutual aid is something that came up during the pandemic. There were groups doing incredible work in different, neighborhoods, Greenmount West, Waverly, and others. And that's really community-based advocacy. It just means, being a good neighbor and really looking out for each other. And I think that is another thing where, whether it's COVID related, but even before, a lot of the problems that people are facing, sometimes they're not going to talk to other agencies. They're not going to make their problems known, and so if you have folks just keeping an eye out on each other, I think that makes for incredible community-based advocacy. So we'll circle back around, and you'll see that a lot of this stuff overlaps. So let's move to regulatory advocacy, and then we can see how, all four of these things really do overlap.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
So regulatory advocacy can be one of the things that can be kind of I think probably among the most difficult to kind of just wedge yourself in there. It can be really sort of, it can be difficult to just know what's going on at a city agency or a state agency, what they're working on, how laws are being adjusted and fine-tuned. And so figuring out where these issues that you care about are, what agency is regulating them, what they're doing, if they're making any changes that you want to get involved in. A lot of the critical ways that you can do that and find out about these things are just relate back to community advocacy and making sure that you're working with groups, that you are working through the process that whatever the agency is that's working on it. And also just kind of monitoring their websites. Sometimes you don't actually know that something that you're interested in has actually come up as something that you could weigh in on, unless you keep an eye where they, as they say, promulgate new regulations and put them out into the public for comment. And so that comment period is actually a really critical piece. And if you don't know that it's coming, there's no way to comment. But if we think about, say, property taxes in Baltimore City, and helping make sure that your neighbors get access to, say, property tax credit programs, or you're aware of kind of what's going on. So let's say that if we think back to community advocacy and we think about, helping your neighbor get connected to maybe even prepaying their property taxes or getting the homeowner's property tax credit, and then you get involved and you get involved with a group that's working on making sure that the way that the property taxes work, or the way that the prepayments work, that it's equitable. And that can be a part of the regulatory advocacy. And then if you want to lobby your legislator because you want them to change how that process works, that's where you sort of slide into legislative advocacy. But it's absolutely the kind of thing where you can kind of move up and down between all the levels of advocacy, and they really inform the work that you're doing as you're moving through. And I'll just also flag that, so there was some recent, brand new as of December 1, debt collection laws that are part of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act that became effective December 1 that now say that debt collectors can contact you over social media, they can text you, and that was actually part of a regulatory process that was taken up during the previous presidential administration, and there was a lot of advocacy by individuals and by organizations to try to kind of limit that, and yet we still find ourselves where we are. So sometimes it really can depend on kind of what you're facing. But we can kind of move in and out of this regulatory piece as we think about this. But Claudia, I'm hoping you'll share some of your experiences with regulatory advocacy. I know that you and I were both recently working on some regulatory advocacy with letters that go out to folks that are facing foreclosure.
Yeah, I would just say that I can't emphasize enough how much it is important for us to hear, for the legislature and for policymakers at all levels to hear from real people about what they're experiencing. In the foreclosure space, we know that people also get letters from the government particularly about folks facing tax sale foreclosure. And those letters are not consumer friendly. And there are many, I mean, we're talking about many barriers to those letters, right? There's the font size, there's sort of practical parts of this. There's who it's sent from, when, whether people open mail. And now we've had a situation in the last 14 months where mail delivery is questionable. So in the advocacy space, I think it's just so important that not only do lawmakers hear from citizens, but also regulatory agency folks hear from actual citizens. And so I think we just need to emphasize in the regulatory advocacy space, there are lots of folks who work in the city and state level, and we have to tell them what people are experiencing in the community because they don't know. And I think it's been so great to hear from people saying, no, actually, I never got a letter like that, or here's the letter I got. I'm 76 years old. I need glasses. I may be experiencing cognitive decline. There's just a lot here that people need to hear from real people about what they're experiencing in their community. And I would just also even say on another level, we're also entering a time where we're also hearing about a lot of scams and efforts to separate people from their money, payments from the government, that people received in the last 2 years and saying, oh, well, I can give you some upfront money. And when you get your payment, I'll help you cash your check. I mean, there's all sorts of things that people are experiencing. So it's really important that the work with older adults, that agencies hear from real people about what they're experiencing. And there also may be people who come to your door. We know that Baltimore also had a series of people, sometimes contractors come and knock on people's door. There's all sorts of things that people are experiencing in the community throughout the city and state, that it's just really important that older adults talk to both lawmakers, city council, elected officials from Maryland, as well as federal elected officials. So I really appreciate the collaborative work of the advocacy agencies today, because we've all been working together, but it's so important for people to hear from real homeowners and real citizens living in the communities. So I would just emphasize that.
That is so true, and absolutely ties into the next topic that we're going to jump into, which is legislative advocacy, which is as I said before, is the piece that we think of as when we're talking about advocacy. This is what people automatically jump to, and this can be federal, state, city, and county council. It can be, and I will say that there are laws that specifically relate to people who are lobbyists, but that often has to do with like the number of hours and the person's job being dedicated to something, whether or not somebody has to register as a lobbyist. And in general, the average person is never going to kind of encounter that as a problem, and because the whole point is, as Claudia said, that legislators want to hear about the lived experiences of people. They represent you, and so that's why they need to hear from you. If we, I'll just before I jump into city or county council advocacy work, I'll just mention federal very briefly. It's not work that MBLS generally does. It is work that other organizations do more frequently. But there is regulatory advocacy. There is legislative advocacy. There was the Build Back Better bill that a lot of folks wanted to weigh in on and have and think through kind of what was going to be in the components of the bill. And so there are many reasons why people might potentially get involved in that. And it is certainly its own process. But
Amy, can I just say one thing also about a state, the state legislature, and just how
we'll get to the state legislature after
so,
city and county council.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to start just at the ground level, because this is going to be probably the most accessible level that folks are going to encounter, that folks are going to get involved in the legislative process. The city and county councils throughout the state of Maryland meet year round, periodic breaks, but they're doing a lot of the nitty gritty work that about the services that you receive, about what's happening in your community. There was a big community push that just went into effect recently, having to do with plastic bags in Baltimore City, in an effort to corral trash issues, and figuring out how to engage with this process. The most important part is figuring out whose district do you live in, and what issues are they working on, and also just reaching out to them about what it is you're experiencing, what it is you see, helping, and again, relating back to that community advocacy piece, helping your neighbor who's struggling with their water bill. One of the things that we found to be the most effective as we were working on water bill issues in the last couple of years is actually engaging with the city council person, which is an unusual thing. But if you think about it, this is a city agency that this is, and the council member is there to assist, to help ensure that folks get their issues resolved. And so many of the issues that got escalated with water bills actually came from city council members when the resident notified them of the issues that they were experiencing. And so issues related to trash, issues related to the things that are happening in your community, and this is things to engage with your city or county council person on. John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm perfect. I was just going to add or sort of pick up there, because I think Amy brings up a great point about this idea about creating. I mean, look, it's like, democracy 101 in civics class and, 6th grade, but like creating a feedback loop between your representatives and the residents, because as Amy just pointed out, I mean, I think a lot of the city council people, some folks have been there a long time. Some folks haven't, these are just regular folks, and a lot of, that decided to run. Sometimes a long time in the council is good. Sometimes it's not good, so I think keeping in touch with them and letting them know. And a lot of the bills that we've seen come up, or the council bills, we've had to do a lot of kind of constant editing and perspective giving to the folks so that they're written the right way. And I think this really is where unfortunately in the city, and I lived in LA, but then I lived in Baltimore, for a long, long time. And I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but it is incredibly apparent how much, regulatory advocacy overlaps with this city or county council. And the fact that when the programs, like programmatically, when they don't work, oftentimes really the only recourse that folks have in dealing with the agencies is contacting their city council. And I think that that's sort of one real pressure point for the city to just sort of demonstrate, that these programs shouldn't have to run like that. I mean, they should just run better so that you shouldn't have to call your council person. But oftentimes that is the case. And even sometimes when you do call the council person, it still doesn't happen. So, and I think that, but at least the silver lining with that is that the council person, like Amy said, sees, gosh, this really needs work, and maybe we can put a bill up, or maybe we can continue this, and it, they become aware of the problems. But I think that's a big overlap with regulatory and kind of city and county level, where you've got to call your council people to figure out how to get something to move through the city.
One of the reasons we were involved in this successfully passed water bill recently, or a bill to change the structure of the water billing process, and discounts that are afforded to folks that are on reduced incomes, has to do with a lot of the folks that were reaching out about concerns and complaints with their water bills. And so council members knew that it was a concern. They weren't just hearing it from advocates, they were hearing it from so many of their constituents. Claudia, did you want to jump in with a city or county council thoughts, or should we move along to?
No, keep going. You're doing, this is great.
Wonderful. All right.
This is Inez. I would like to say.
Yeah.
This is Inez. I would like to say a couple things before you move on. With the city council and the county council, sometimes we're talking about seniors. I think it needs to be stressed in a 1, 2, 3, not a whole book about it, on how to contact them, and not just through the web, but also, can you call 311 and get the numbers, or you call the city's information number 396-3100 and get and they can connect you to your city council person, or call 311 and they can tell you who, based on where you live, what district you're in and who your council person is, how to contact them. Often people don't know how to, the basics. And so that's real crucial. And then also that, like I said, what are the means of communicating? And if they don't respond, because often that's what's happened, people feel like people are victims or feel like they're victims, because you've got to be consistent and persistent. Consistent and persistent. I found if you're not, nothing gets done. And I hate to say it, but that's the truth.
Inez has really jumped in with a really important kind of best practice way to have effective advocacy is that consistency and persistency. That's really important. Thank you for that, Inez. Let's move along to talking a little bit about the state legislature. So actually, before I do that, to sort of address kind of how to reach out to your city or county council, 311 is certainly a resource. If you have internet access, it can be really a critical resource to finding out if you don't know whose district you're in. This is all stuff that you can find out. If you're engaging with somebody if you're engaging in that kind of community advocacy, then that's where we often see people kind of helping connect each other with services. And that could include helping connect your neighbors and friends with who their council person is, helping them find the email address or helping them find the phone number so that they can call. Obviously, emailing, I strongly encourage it because it gives you a record of the date and time that you reached out to your council member. And so just something to think about. But if you're that consistent and persistent person, you might be keeping a log of, when you've reached out and what you've done to kind of resolve the issue that you're working on. But the same is true with the state legislature, that you can find out whose district you're in. You can by going to the Maryland General Assembly website, which is in the PowerPoint presentation, and you can know whose district you're in if you don't, and you can see what issues people are working on. The state legislature meets every year for a 90-day period between January and April. A lot of things happen with the legislature outside of that period. However, it's still useful and important to know that the real kind of nitty-gritty business that happens with the legislature happens during that period. And so it can be, although the website may not give you all of the information that you're hoping for, it can help you figure out what. There's the sort of initial introduction. It's called first reader. Then it goes to a committee hearing. I hope that I'm not having any problems. I've just got a little pop-up that says my internet is unstable.
A little bit, Amy, but you're okay. You're coming through.
Okay. So the committee hearing is actually where a lot of the really important work happens on a bill, because that's where a lot of amendments might get added. That's where they're actually specifically soliciting testimony when they have the hearing date for the bill. And all of this is stuff that you can track through the Maryland General Assembly website when there's a bill that you can search the bills by topic. And then you can also create a list you create an account and then you can create a list that you get regular updates on, letting you know what's going on with bills. And so you can find out when are bill hearings happening. John, did you have any legislative thoughts for the state legislature?
I think it's something, and maybe Claudia can jump in here too, but I think it's something that Inez just brought up. I mean, tracking the bills can be super confusing, following kind of where they are. But I think I just want to echo something that was said earlier about real people and about, those testimonies. I think it's tough to get folks down to Annapolis. It's really hard. Obviously the time, the transportation, making it easy and accessible. And then, maybe it's a time to talk about how exactly to do the type of testimony that we'd like. And I think just to kind of build on what Claudia was saying before, and Inez, maybe you have some feelings on this too, but the way that you word your testimony, I mean, how, and we could do a whole separate training on it, but I think it's this idea of really connecting with the legislatures as real people, having them hear real stories, and this is where it gets tricky. I mean, understanding the gist of, the bill you're testifying on behalf or against, and really trying to align it with what you think the legislators' understanding of the problem is that's trying to be solved, and then really stepping into their heads in a way and saying, hey, I'm a real person. So if you want to step in and say, this is where your thinking on this bill is wrong, or say, this is why you've got it, and I just want to reinforce, what's been written or the narrative that's been developed around a particular bill. And so that, that experience of getting in front of them, I think is incredibly important, but it's a slog to get down there. And I think as much as we can do to, think about the ways that we can make that easier, and just sort of prep people and get them ready for that kind of thing, the better.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely ties into the community-based advocacy piece, because the working with other groups, working with other people that can potentially help submit testimony, help draft testimony, help you think about kind of how you're engaging. There are avenues to make sure that we're working together and that we are pushing the thing forward. Claudia, were you about to jump in, or
Yeah,
Inez?
I was going to say that I agree with what my colleagues are saying, but I want to personally say that if anybody wants to go to Annapolis, I am personally volunteering to drive anybody who wants to go and testify really on any issue at any time. It's that important. And in terms of like arranging rides, I will arrange a ride, make sure you get there, make sure you get to the right room, and make sure you get home as well. I will say that the legislature is going to largely be online again, probably in the 2022 session. So as we prepare for that, that is sort of a new and different opportunity, and maybe makes it more accessible for some, and less accessible for others. But I also just want to emphasize that you don't need to know. I know a lot of people are worried about their ability to speak publicly, and that, they're not trained, or they're not educated, or they're not, fill in the blank, right? But I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for the work that we do, for people not to bring, like, I'll help you prepare, I'll help you write, we're there to support you as well. Like, what is it that you want to say? And you got 3 minutes to talk, and we'll help you make the most of those 3 minutes. But I want to encourage people in neighborhoods to talk about problems, because I am among the folks who are the policy wonks, who are into some of the details and can tell you about the history of this legislation. But it's a different testimony when you're hearing from somebody who lives in the community and has lived in there for 20 years. It has a different impact, and we are sometimes missing that voice in favor of the policy wonks like me. And I think it's really, I was always so inspired by Inez's work on the liquor board, because she said, look, this is what's happening in my community, in my neighborhood. When I get up in the morning, this is what I see, right? And that's a whole different level of testimony. That's different from, there are 650 liquor stores in the city of Baltimore, blah, 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 and there are, so I just want to urge that people, bring others to the table, figure out how to make them comfortable. If it's a safe ride, we'll figure out how to get a safe ride. If it's lunch, we'll figure out how to get you lunch. But some of these, the strategies, is if it's like, hey, we're going to have a practice session. During our advocacy day in Annapolis last year, that was online, we had a couple of practice sessions where we talked to people. It's like, hey, what are the points? What are the 3 points you want to make? What's most important to you and your organization? We're happy we can do those things. So I put that out there. I think it's so important on the state level. And then the other thing is about, even when we're not during session, we need to cultivate those relationships so that those state representatives actually go for a walk with people who are from that community, narrating, taking them around on foot to see what they're working on, so that you're not only doing it during the session, it's also when the legislature is not in session as well. Inez, is there something you want to say?
Yes, I concur with everything you've said. Also, it's nothing like, I always talk about, get up from that desk and come out to the community. It's one thing is theory, the other is reality. And I need you to get up and come out, and we're going to do a walk about the concerns that I have. And clearly what you're saying is nothing like a real story. Like you said, I bought a condo 34 years ago. When I bought it, we had very few vacants, and not that many liquor stores. Now, all I have is liquor stores and vacants. And it's nothing like telling your story, because it's real and people know when something is real. So I commit, and so what if you would do for me to make sure, I think that would be another thing, if communities and associations have the contact information where they can get help with going down to Annapolis and, or, you know, and telling their story. It's nothing like it. And for me, that's just a part of my personality. I can always just tell my story. Whether you want to hear it or not, I tell my story. And reality is reality. And thank you for all that you do. And I'm always willing to help someone to help them with what it is that, how I got my story across. And it's really by just saying what reality is and my thoughts and suggestions on what could be some recommendations to help. Not just throw it out there, but also some recommendations from the community on things that we think that could make it better. I just want to share that.
Fantastic, thank you. I want to move on so that we can have an opportunity to really hear from Inez about kind of what her personal experience was like working with the liquor board. But I want to just touch on voting rights. Voting is advocacy, and so John, why don't you jump in about just some thoughts about how voting really ties in with all of this?
Well, you know, I mean, I think that this kind of undergirds all we've been saying. And I think, you know, I was writing up some notes on this, and I just had to put in there, I didn't want to get, you know, grim or other, but there are just incredible efforts to restrict voting these days. And I think that we're just on a sort of slow decline in a lot of ways. So it's all the more reason why, you know, and this overlaps so much with the community-based advocacy, but, you know, making sure that friends and neighbors are registered. So there's like that. I think there's the basic level of sort of registration first, understanding where the polling places are. Like Claudia said, I mean, getting folks to and from the polling places safely. Then the step up from there is volunteering at the polling places. You know, obviously you can, you can get involved with candidates and things like that if that's your bag. But just structurally making sure everybody gets out there, you know, safely to and from. But I think that upfront voting registration and advocacy place is really, really important for folks to be a part of, because it just feels like with every passing year, it's just getting harder and harder for that to happen. So we have to keep also a close eye on those bills that deal with registration and voter access. And then, you know, this is again, kind of, you know, to the point before, you know, understanding where to get, you know, have conversations about, you know, what you're voting on. I mean, and this is hard to track for anybody. And so I think, you know, one of the ways that kind of came up is that people can do, I mean, you can do, they might sound sort of boring and trite, but, you know, you can do get-togethers, you know, with friends and family to sit down, you know, and do like a candidate day or whatever. And you can even assign, I mean, one strategy is to assign different people that want to come. So it's like, all right, you've got the chicken salad, you know, and the greens, and then you have this candidate. And can, you know, is there a way that you can do a little bit of research or get a sense of them and come and say a few words on them, you know, and not everybody's going to be experts, and, you know, it's not really the idea, but it's about, you know, like dividing up some of the time it takes to see about what you're voting on between a bunch of different people, and then getting together and sort of sharing the load a little bit. So it's not a perfect system. It's sort of, you know, you're always kind of looking at it. So I think there's the defensive thing of just making sure everybody's there and gets to the voting places and gets registered, but then offensively, you know, really educating each other about the candidates and things like that. So some strategies there.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Why don't we?
It's me again. Can I say something?
Inez, this is the time that I want you to say. This is the time that you're the star. We want to hear about. Okay. We want to hear about you.
Okay. So with the voting, it's crucial that people know that first and foremost, what it is that we want and need in our community, not what you're going to do for us, what we want and need in our community. And how is it that you're going to help us to create or get that's needed in community? That's the first thing. The commitment and how with the people that want to be voted in and or revoted in. The other thing is that we can hold them to, the community can hold the constituent and, we can hold the politician, the state, federal, and local politicians to we can hold them accountable, because this is what they said they were going to do when we met with them. However, they haven't done it, so we can vote them out. The other thing is, I agree with John. Definitely, we need to understand what we're voting on, whether it's going to support or help your community or not. So I think it's real important also to have just a 1, 2, 3 paper, again, a resource, a one-sided paper on the voting process, what you have to do. And then, like I said, it's one thing to sign people up to vote, but it's another thing to actually get to the voting locations and early voting and all the different processes as it relates to voting. So I just want to talk about that as, also. That's all. Thank you.
Well, and as maybe you can take now as a
The liquor board, I'm sorry. So with the liquor board, it was really, well, like I said, we have a tremendous amount of liquor stores, and I live in the Sandtown, Winchester community. And in that community, like I said, when I bought a condo here 34 years ago, it wasn't as many liquor stores. Well, now it's many, many more. So with that, me and some of my neighbors, we were tired of it, because we need some other amenities in the community, not just liquor stores that ended up to be hangouts, hangouts outside of the liquor stores. In some cases, some of the liquor stores were dirty and trashy around, and so on and so forth. So I met up with Baltimore Good. I became a part of the Baltimore Good Neighbors Coalition. And what we did was we talked about liquor stores throughout Baltimore City, but I talked about the liquor stores in my community. And I talked with neighbors also, their concerns and issues. And sometimes they would leave out the liquor stores and leave trash. Sometimes they would be loud and uncouth. Sometimes they would urinate in the area. It was a lot of different things. So with that, I went down, every time a case would come up down at the liquor board, right at Baltimore City, right down at the City Hall, I would go down and protest on that I didn't support it. Also, I would go to prior to that, I would have done my homework. I would look around, make sure, see what was going on externally and internally at the liquor establishment. Also, I went to the police department and got a list of how often the police was called to that establishment. So I had all of that data to follow me up to make sure that what I was saying was accurate and true. So with that, how many times, like I said, the police was called to an establishment, regardless to what it was, whether it was just a loud noise and whether it was selling illegal drugs outside of the liquor store, inside of the liquor store. So I did that. I went down to the liquor board. I protested. I talked about, I actually had a letter stating these things, but then I got my neighbors to sign to say who they were, how close we lived to the liquor establishment, because that's crucial. The closer you are to an establishment that's in opposition to the establishment, the better it is, because the opposite side, believe it or not, if you live in Howard County and we're talking about something in Baltimore City, it doesn't mean as much, as opposed to I'm living a block away or in the block where the establishment is. So all those kind of things are important. How close you are to the establishment, what your concerns are, the recommendations, and once a year, the liquor establishment they have to renew, or their liquor license should be renewed. So as residents, we can go and protest it. And that's what I did, me and some of my neighbors, but I was always there. They know me. They said, oh, here she comes. So it was one of those deals. And then I also went down to the state. Same thing. I went down to the state and I told my story. And I know my state officials and all that good stuff, but also I just had to tell my story, because until that consistency and persistent. Again, that was real important. I had my paperwork. I had my petitions from all of my neighbors. I had where I live, that I pay taxes, that I vote, and this is not acceptable. You've got to do something better. And so with that, I think the more I did it, I think that I convinced or saw it was for other people that they could also do it. And so with that, and I refuse to give up. That's a part of my personality also. So I refuse to give up, but I think, and what I've done was I've gone to other community associations to show them how and share with them what some things that I did. And also we had different people from a different aspect talking about it. For instance, maybe a church. It may be a young person going to school, have to catch the bus in front of an establishment. It may be a senior that's on a walker. It may be someone that maybe have to, someone that if they had to, like I said, if they had to wait for the bus right in front of the establishment, they were kind of afraid. So it was all different. So we looked at it at all different aspects of the impact that it would have. And so that helped an awful lot. I've just learned a lot. And I don't mind sharing the things that I've done. And I'm always willing to learn. So that's where I am with things. And like I said, once people know that they can get down to the state, and I want to make sure that I have a list that I can share of where they can call to get that would be excellent. And I'm gonna shut up and let you guys talk.
That is so helpful. Thank you, Inez. So we've gotten to the point now that we can kind of, if there are questions, if there are things that we touched on that people want to kind of dig back into a little bit about the process, or about other kinds of kind of practices, or other people have tips or thoughts that they want to share, we welcome them now.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I actually want to piggyback on the comment that John made in reference to voting rights advocacy. I love that idea of having community members sponsor prospective candidates that want to run for office. But I wanted to actually speak a little bit more about that idea that you have, and to see if that is already in practice in Maryland and Baltimore right now, and if you could just maybe elaborate some more about that idea, if it isn't in practice, and if it's something that you hope to work on in the immediate future.
It's not really in practice in any formal way. I mean, I think like Inez was saying, everybody has to do their best to stay connected with the candidates, and and I think that over time, if they if we can kind of build in this practice of getting together and sponsoring and talking to each other about the issues as they come up, it can be something that like a community association or neighborhood association can sponsor and say, hey, we want to have this. The other thing, Monique, that's interesting is that there are some groups around town, and I don't want to endorse anybody, but there are groups around town that do like legislative report cards, and things like that. I think that's a very, very valuable thing, as long as those tools are used as a starting place to sort of understand and do that basic research on whatever the bills are, the candidates, and not just like, I'm going to look at what grades they get and just vote the way they tell me to vote. But I think it's a nice starting place. But, to your question and to your point, I mean, it's something that, we can really build out. I think it's a strategy at least.
And
And
I love it. I love that idea.
Yeah, there are some efforts. I'm happy after this to sort of, there are some groups. One group in particular that was developed by somebody in Maryland is Black Girls Vote. They've done a lot of work on educating voters, and but there are and League of Women Voters have done some forums around voting. And there was also an effort in the city to, like, they were doing kind of parties like, hey, let's all get together and, make sure we vote and go to the polls together and then have and I think there have been different efforts in different communities, but I can put together like a brief list of some of that. Because Monique, that is it certainly is a strategy that we could also make stronger, right? And help people know that those resources exist and that they could do it in their community. I also know that National Night Out was something that people were also tying to, like, hey, get out there, get in your community, vote, know your representative, those kinds of things. They were putting that all together. So yeah, I do think that there are definitely opportunities. And there were also some opportunities that were around, particularly around the planning department and the census. So that we're also saying census and tying that to voters and voting registration, which I think is obviously really good. But now that census counting is over, I think some of those people are still really valuable community ambassadors, and that they may also be helpful in getting people down to Annapolis. They may be helpful in other to push forward other strategies.
That's wonderful. I would love to learn more about that from you. Maybe we can speak more offline about that.
Sounds great. Will do.
Fantastic.
I know we just have 5 minutes. Can I ask the group a question? Something early on came up that Claudia said that made me think about this. When we were talking about the bills and things that go out to community and easy access to them, talking about fonts and things like this, we got into a little bit of a tiff. Let me back up. The question is, when let's say the final bills and legal notices that go out for tax sale have been notoriously difficult for people to read, and we got into a bit of a tiff, I think, a back and forth with the city law department about this, and so I'm wondering what the balance is between the needs of community to be able to read these things, like you're saying, the consumer perspective, versus is that statutorily dictated what has to be in those bills, and then even down to the layout. And we got into a real back and forth about this, and it was like, this isn't our fault. This is dictated by but so I don't know, does anybody know, or can anybody speak about that balance between, because it was sort of like, we're throwing up our hands, sorry, we have to make the FBLNs look this way, versus can we make the font bigger or put this in non-legalese? And I know Shane is on the call, but we talk about legalese a lot. So any thoughts?
So I'll just say that what is required to be in the notice is prescribed by statute, but the interpretation of kind of what form that takes is something that, again, this is something that sort of ties into the sort of flow through between community advocacy, regulatory advocacy, and legislative advocacy, because talking to the law department about how they interpret this is regulatory advocacy, is talking to them about like the importance of it being readable for folks. And you do that based on community advocacy, because that these are difficult notices for people to read. And then, when you run up against these situations where you have a group that has just decided this is how this has to be, that's when you have to switch to the kind of legislative advocacy to say, like, okay, well, you've said that it has to be this, so perhaps we should put into the statute, it needs to be at least this type of font, and it needs to be legible.
Yeah, I think I would just add that definitely identifies an opportunity for advocacy, because if we're coming up against the law department saying, here's how we understand this, then either the law needs to change, or, as Amy said, that's a place where we need to advocate to make sure that they interpret things in a way that understands what the needs are in the community. Because I don't think we're going to get very far just telling them they've misinterpreted the law or anything like that. But if they're identifying that as something that prevents them from doing this in a way that actually takes account of community needs, then that's definitely a place that we should focus advocacy.
I'm wondering also, like, is it really, I'm asking the legal folks, would it be, could we have a conversation with the chief judge or the foreclosure bar about this sort of thing, like because you know they're saying, well, this is the law and we're interpreting this way, and it's like, so if you were to make it in a 14-point font and still in legalese, would you be breaking the law? I mean, yeah. Are there strategies that we could work on this issue without going to having a bill?
So the in order to kind of get some sort of different legal interpretation, and this of course goes to the sort of balance of power that exists between the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch, which obviously exists, in a city level and a state level, and then also, a federal level. But if you've got this kind of interpretation that is in many ways kind of coming from the executive level about what the legislature has come up with, you then have, if you want some sort of judicial interpretation, you would need to file a lawsuit against Baltimore City and say that what that they're doing is a violation of some law that potentially already exists, including a violation of people's rights or some sort of discriminatory purpose. Certainly discriminatory against people that are of kind of limited visibility, and pursue it from that angle. And so sometimes people will look at that kind of the weighing the options of either suing the city or pursuing something with the legislature and decide maybe I want to just go to the legislature. So it sort of depends on what you're looking at. All right, we are just a little bit over time. I want to thank everyone who came and participated. Thank you so much. You've been such a lovely, engaged audience. I want to say a special thank you to Claudia for her wonderful insights, and a special thank you to Inez for her just absolutely incredible thoughts and insights. She is exactly the kind of community member that we all want in our communities, and we all should try to be. So I hope that everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone.